When looking for a tennis racket, it's very important to know what the racket's balance is. So basically, if you put the racket on its halfway point, will the head tilt down, or will the head tilt up? Or if you put it on its balance point, will it be evenly balanced? So let's talk a little bit about the racket's balance. If a standard length racket is 27 inches, that means the halfway point is 13 and a half inches. You convert that to the metric system, it's just over 34 centimeters, 34.29 to be exact. That'll be the halfway point of the racket. Usually when we say a racket's evenly balanced, we say generally around that 34 centimeter mark. It doesn't have to be exactly there, although you can, but usually if you're around 34 centimeters, that makes it an evenly balanced racket. You'll also hear people quote the point system where 1/8 of an inch equals 1 point. So if someone says a racket is 3 points headlight, that means 3/8 of an inch from the halfway point is where the balance point is. I don't use that too often, and from my experience, most customizers and most language for tennis is the metric system. It's a little bit easier that way. So if you want to have a racket that's at say 33 centimeters balance and you want it to make it lighter, it'd be a lot easier just to say I want it to be 32.5 or 32 centimeters, something like that. It's a little bit easier to work with, I have found, if you just quote the metric system when you're talking about the racket's balance. That being said, the point system is something you will see if you look at a racket's balance online. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about a racket's balance. Who would use a headlight racket? A racket that if you put it on its halfway point tilts up, you need to bring the balance point down. Headlight racket, let's say, is between 31 and 33 and a half centimeters uh, balance point. So that actually would make the racket pretty headlight. The further you go from that 34 down to say 33.5, 33, 32.5, 32, it makes the racket much more headlight and less evenly balanced. Someone who's more advanced usually likes a headlight racket. As we talked earlier, people who are advanced prefer heavier rackets, prefer higher swing weights a lot of the time. However, they also like headlight rackets that allow a little bit more maneuverability. That means a lot of the mass isn't totally towards the tip. It's a little bit more evenly balanced through the frame, even though the racket itself may be heavier. So a more advanced player would want a heavier racket that's maneuverable. So something underneath that evenly balanced would be a good fit for them. So if you look at a lot of the top higher end rackets that are for advanced players, you see a lot of their balance points being around that 33, 32 mark. You can go as low as you want. Usually you don't want to go too low with it because then it becomes very uneven, a little bit tough to maneuver, tough to control if you say put tons of weight on the handle. It's perfectly legal, but it's a little bit difficult to do that. But a lot of players will put on a leather grip or hide some lead under the grip or put some silicone in the handle. Makes the racket a little bit more headlight while not affecting the swing weight of the racket. Who would use a head heavy racket? Generally, I would say it's beginner rackets because these are rackets that are usually going to be lightweight rackets, oftentimes oversized head rackets, where even though the total mass is pretty light, the total weight is pretty light, it's not entirely in the handle. A lot of it's spread towards the racket frame. So a lot of that mass, when they make contact with the lighter weight racket, will help with a head heavy racket that's 34 centimeters and higher. Usually don't go too high with the head heavy. You'll see a lot between that 34 and 35 centimeters. You can go as head heavy as you want. You can put as much lead tape on the racket as you want. It's perfectly legal. But usually if a racket gets head heavy, it gets very tiresome to play with. It can get hard to maneuver. So usually when you see the head heavy rackets, they're slightly head heavy and they're overall generally lighter weight rackets. So what's the best fit for you? I would say if you're advanced, definitely go with a racket that's headlight, maybe around 33 centimeters, maybe a little bit less, and find out what works best for your game. Usually if you're advanced, you like a little bit heavier racket. Men usually prefer slightly heavier than women, as we've discussed. But headlight makes it a little bit more maneuverable while still having a heavier racket. If you're a beginner, like we've discussed, an oversized head racket could be a good fit. A lot of those will naturally move the balance point up to make it slightly head heavy to help you make contact through the ball and generally get a little bit more power on your shots.